So
Okay.
we're recording the session, and we don't record comments, but it's just good to have the session for Ross if anybody can't make it today. So welcome everybody who is here and has joined us live on the 7th of July at 12 o'clock. This is the third of our Life After Lockdown mental fitness series that we've been running, and we are achingly close now to lockdown being over, aren't we? Fingers crossed, from the 19th of July. And this session, we took your feedback from survey questions before and comments about what you would like to have covered today. And you've told us that you'd like emotional confidence, imposter syndrome, and maximising positive mindset. And I can certainly relate to that feeling of imposter syndrome at several points in my career. So I'm really looking forward to Ross's session today. And I shall pass you over now to Ross.
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, like you, I'm looking forward to sharing knowledge. It's not about me being the expert, it's just about me sharing. And please use the chat box to have some questions. That's very important to us, and keep feeding back to us generally. You know, it informs our next move. So what we do is not set in stone. So remember our group agreement, where we generally do this to make everybody feel safe. There's no wrong questions. Respect each other. Be patient, which has been gone before, and I'm sure it will happen today, that re-engage with the learning. Okay, so the first one is an image I've got, and I've used this for many, many years. And when I talk about self-esteem and confidence, I talk about self-esteem is the handle of the umbrella. And without the handle, you can't raise the canopy of the umbrella. That's the confidence. So they feed into each other, but without self-esteem, and I'll come on to what it means in a second. But for now, let's go call it self-worth. If we don't have self-worth, then we can't open the canopy to develop confidence and not being scared to say and do and think things. And so it's a very simple visual metaphor, if you will, of what we want to do with you today, is that self-esteem and confidence. So just keep that in the back of your mind there. So let's go along. So what is it? Now, it's a combination of factors which underpin confidence. Okay, this is from a guy in 1969, and he wrote many books on this, and he's a real expert. But it's your evaluation, your perception, your appraisal of yourself, which is very powerful. So if you don't think you are good or successful, etc., then ultimately other people might pick up on that as well, because it shows. The face can have up to 10,000 different facial expressions. And the very language as well has got to be congruent with how you're looking, how you're feeling, how you're talking. So, it's how you feel about yourself. And there's 5 key components to that. So your perception of life, your actual skills and knowledge base, how you modify your aspiration levels, your application and motivation, how you pick up things, how you go with things, how you deliver things. And that links into number 5, your resilience, your adaptability to keep pushing, to step back, to look at things from a different angle. So self-esteem, it might seem complicated, but it all comes down to how much you value yourself. And if you value yourself, you can develop confidence. Okay. So what is it in real terms? Your own perception of yourself, not being scared to say and do and think things, speaking or being quiet, going against the flow when everybody else is doing one thing. You say, actually, no, I disagree with that. And I'm willing to show you that I disagree. Volunteering for something, supporting yourself, backing yourself. It's okay being a little bit different. Being vulnerable, there's a good one, isn't there? Being vulnerable when perhaps we don't feel so good sometimes, and sharing it with somebody. Now that is a good sign of that you think you're worth something, you're confident, you're not scared. But it can be affected by lots of things. Some of these things, which I'll go through in a second, you might very well be aware of, like a trauma. But some of the stuff, it might be very subconscious, subliminal, and you're not aware of it. And this is an interesting point to how we develop things. Yeah. So it could be your appearance, how you view your appearance, a previous trauma, as I mentioned, your level of skill at the moment. You can't choose your parents, but your parents' upbringing, how they give you emotional literacy, confidence, allowing for the rules to be made and then understand them and develop them together, your value of relationships, all these sorts of things have an impact on your development of self-esteem and confidence. But, you know, much of it is based on your own perception. And if we're, in a very simple way, if we're very more positive than negative, we're looking for the good sides of stuff most of the time. And actually, it's quite a good quality to have that. Because on the opposite side of that equation, if we're a bit negative, we can become even more negative. And then really that might not be the exact perception of what's actually happening. So, you know, when people say I'm an optimist or a pessimist, glass half full, glass half empty, I think it's more, you've got to be more cautious if you're less optimistic, because you can drop down deeper. And over my years working with children who have, and young adults who have had some traumas in the past, they tend to magnify the negatives and ignore the positives. And that's not a good recipe for long-term development. So the question is, whenever you're doing something, where's the evidence that you've been good or you've been poor? And I suspect if you search hard enough, you'll find more good evidence than bad evidence. And I think that's fascinating that you can look at that. I'll come back to evidence as we go along today. Some sound effects for you here. I love all that. So, yeah, a typical theory is the way we think can influence our feelings, our emotions. And when we've got emotions, good or bad or indifferent, they can affect our behavior, our actions. So it all starts with how we think. So if we're thinking a good perception of ourselves, we could feel perhaps more positive, more optimistic, then we probably act more positive and optimistic. And then people perceive us as more positive and optimistic and confident. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it does start with us. It does start with how we think, how we interpret the world. And I said before on the previous slide, it's about collecting that evidence. And when the evidence becomes irresistible, that it's going in the right direction, that gives you momentum and impetus to develop even more, like a rolling stone that goes faster and faster and faster and doesn't gather any moss. So, you know, we've got some of the basics there. But sometimes, again, whether we know this or not, we can have excuses. We're scared of failing. You're not good enough. What will others think? That perception of others is a massive one. Feel you're not making progress, you've got no help, no support, no time, you've got too much or too little ambition, yeah, or you like your comfort zone too much. So you might like the idea of doing something fantastically successful and financially rewarding and fulfilling, but you don't want to step outside your comfort zone. And I think that's fascinating, you know, very fascinating. Or it's just a bit too risky, and I'll do it next year, the year after. That procrastination factor. So we've all got these excuses, and sometimes you've got to fight against them. Sometimes you don't know they're there, but you've really got to try and propel yourself through that. And what I say, close that gap between what your perception is and what the reality is. If you can close that gap by doing something, you know more at that moment in time by doing something where you actually stand. What you've done, you can evaluate it rather than thinking what's going to happen. So closing that gap between perception and reality is a very important thing that we keep doing all the time. Okay, why are these celebrities famous? You know, why are they confident? Why have they got that confidence factor? Anybody know the names there? We maybe can have that as a quiz question at the end. They can put it in the chat box afterwards, and I'll give some of my books away. Who can give me? I'll tell you what, I'm a nice person. What, you won't have to get them all. Just get most of them. Show me some effort, show me some application, show me some motivation, all the things we're talking about. Have that belief in yourself. I will then tell you who the winner is. You've got the evidence then that you've done well. So that's a practical application. Well, as you're thinking, I'll give you one in the middle, Lady Gaga. She, you know, why are they confident? Now, it's interesting. She had lots of setbacks when she was younger. She had some family challenges that were quite severe. And yet, you can't find a bigger star in the world at the moment from movies, from acting, I don't know what else, things in pies elsewhere, but very successful, relatively young. So, you know, what is it that makes them confident? Phil Ford in the footballer, top left, you know, very, very young man. And, you know, he's in the England squad on the periphery at the moment, but he might play a starring role tonight. But they've got something about them, you know. Do you want to put some in the chat box? What qualities? Why are they confident? Can you read them out to me, Jenny? Because I'm new.
So I've had some names in. I think people have identified Oprah Winfrey,
Yeah.
late Denzel Washington,
That's
Hillary
the one,
Clinton, We've got Phil Foden from
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx.
Not Jamie Foxx, no, it's Denzel Washington.
Denzel Washington. Just seeing what else people have said. Lady Gaga, we've got Hillary Clinton's being recognised a few times.
Yeah.
So we haven't got anything on qualities yet. So just give you some feedback on the qualities that they've got.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting distracted. So why are they confident? What is it they've got about them? Throw some stuff at us.
Self-belief, straight in there. Yeah. Best at what they do. Oh, nice one here. Compassion.
Well, yeah, compassion is something that's most people don't know about. Is an important quality to sustain the best. Because if we're too harsh on ourselves, we're always competing, always comparing, you're going to burn yourself out. So that, and it's also a high component within resilience. And that might seem counterintuitive, isn't it? Push, 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 not that compassion for self. One of the most erudite professors in the world, Rick Hansen, talks about resilience in 12 qualities, and one of them is compassion. So he says, without compassion, it's very difficult to sustain that success because you can burn yourself out, you're always comparing, and then you don't think you're ever good enough. And the irony is you could be really, really good, but you don't see it.
Couple more before you move on, Ross. We've had determination, ambition, life experience, a calling. Quite a nice one. And being passionate.
Being passionate, that comes back to our original one, self-esteem and confidence, this aspiration, this resilience. A trauma can work as a triggering event, so it could drive you. As it drove me at 16, failed my exams, spent the next 10 years in education, grabbing as many as I could. So work wasn't an option, but studying was, and he went overseas to study. So a triggering event is something that can propel us into that window of performance. Okay, good start on that one. Let's move it on a little bit. Okay, there's a syndrome you might have heard about. It's called Imposter Syndrome. And by its very nature, its definition, it can be quite negative. But I think there's a positive caveat to this. I think the Imposter Syndrome, and I'll talk about it in a second, can actually turn out, if you want it to be a good thing. So let me tell you about what it is first, and then I'll tell you how good it can be. I believe that most people, whether they're the man in the street, the woman in the street, or the form on the stage, at some point they will doubt themselves. And that's quite natural. Human beings, we can be quite proficient at worrying and doubt, but we're also very proficient at recognizing that as an action and then categorizing it, putting it to one side, looking for the evidence to support it or refute it, and probably refute it, and carry on invigorated and experienced then to carry on and develop ourselves even more. So it's a good check in a way, a natural check. We doubt ourselves, human nature, but the top performers, the ones who are self-esteem and confident, resilient, and the ones who've got that amazing success will have a high component of parking that, looking for the evidence to support good performance and moving on. Worry, it creates lots of worry because you're thinking what other people think about you. So for instance, as I said to Jenny before, when we're speaking in front of our peers or working with our peers, we feel as if we're being judged very acutely. It can be in other arenas as well, but that's really an acute area. So imposter syndrome comes to the fore when we worry what other people think too much. And there's lots of different ways to challenge that. And I say, I'll keep coming back to where's the evidence that I'm not good enough? Where's what have I done before? Why am I here now if I did it so bad before? So I'm still in the game. So something's telling me I'm doing something really well. But we tend to dwell on the negatives and we tend to think other people know more than us. And the reality is that we know quite a bit. We're always knowing more and that we are becoming the perceived expert. Yeah. So everything in life is a journey, but you're collating information, you're performing more, you're developing as a person and as a professional. So it's natural to think what other people think, but not for too long. Look for the evidence and then use that to your advantage. Now, I said before, the imposter syndrome could be quite good. And what I mean by that is that if we don't have this imposter syndrome, we can actually think, in some cases, we're the best thing since sliced bread. We think we're fantastic. But to just have a little stop and think, Okay, where's my evidence? I'm doing really well. Okay, what do people think? Well, I'll take some feedback, but ultimately I might use some of that. But if I got this overwhelming evidence that I'm getting more good feedback than bad, people are asking me to do things, I'm getting promoted, then it's telling me that I'm doing something right. So it's a good sort of self-check so we don't get arrogant or big-headed. So I think there's some good stuff to do with imposter syndrome. All I would say is everybody does it, but you've got to park it at some point, and the sooner you park it, the better, really. So let's look at, putting things into practice, performance. And a lot of top jobs, a lot of top professions, lots of top people, there's an element, larger rather than smaller, performance in their lives. And it's something that, if you want to reach out and secure, those highs in life, then you have to at some point perform. So given that, I've got a little chart for you. And this is based on the unconscious incompetence scenario, and I'll explain that a bit more in a second. But if you look at the axis, the bottom one is over time. So most things over time will improve if we've got the right systems around us and we believe in ourselves. And on the vertical axis there, we've got self-esteem. So this self-worth, how much we think we're good at something. It could equally be confidence. It could equally be performance. But let's just look at the contents of this now. So you've got the unconscious incompetence. So somebody who does something, a skill, for instance, and starts off okay at it, and they're just quite unaware that they're okay. They're doing it and it's fine. Nobody's giving anything wrong about it. And this is quite easy. I can do this. Then all of a sudden they start thinking about it, maybe with a bit of feedback, and they're thinking, actually, I'm feeling the pressure now, and maybe I wasn't so good at the start, and maybe I'm further behind the 8 ball than I thought, and maybe this is really tough. Then we start working at something. We start getting some feedback. We start getting guidance. We start practicing. We start learning. We start performing. And then we're getting better slowly, but it's still hard work. And some people call this like driving a car. A lot of people can jump in a car, top left, and do a little bit with it. Yeah, get there, and all of a sudden it gets a bit more complicated. And when you get to the conscious incompetent at the bottom left there, you've got to stare at the windscreen and stare at the gearbox and stare at the indicators, and it's not natural. And the conscious competent is a bit better, you're a bit safer, but it's still hard work. But when we get really good at driving this car, you can go from, say, Preston to Birmingham and not knowing what you've passed in an hour and a half, because it becomes natural, you're in flow. And the top performers make it look effortless. So you'll know you're good. You'll know your evidence will come back when you've done something and it flew past the time, you felt good, you felt in control, and then the feedback marries up with that. So at some point in your lives, you might go through that bit of a dip, but if you keep at it, keep upskilling, keep learning, keep closing that gap between what you think is happening in perception, by doing something, the reality, you're going to get better at some point. Yeah. Okay. And that comes back to this one, performance circles. And I like this because it's simple. I like simple things. But, what I've learned in life, especially in the last few years, is that things are going to be right for you to perform well consistently. So it's very difficult if you're struggling emotionally to go and give a top performance in something, to develop and call on your self-esteem and confidence and your resilience. Because it's difficult sometimes, yeah? I recognize that. So maybe sometimes you want to stay in that comfort zone and it's comfortable and there's little learning. Maybe when you feel more secure and able to and enthusiastic and motivated and everything's lining up right, we can stretch out, yeah? And stretching is great because we can start learning, trying new things. If we're thrown right at the deep end, that red zone, and some people do this in life, and I've seen it so many times, you can actually stop the performance dead for a lifetime. I'm never going to do that again. So a bad experience, almost like a trauma, can stop us. So I'm here to say, a gentle arm around your shoulder. We've got to stretch out that comfort zone a little bit to that stretch zone. But you don't have to be SES military style, go for that red zone all the time and get stressed and prove you're a man or a woman or a leader or a performer. It's not what we do these days. Gentle and slow makes progress sustained. If you get too radical and quick and immediate, then we could go into problems. Oh, you could win. but you could lose heavily. And we don't want that. We want to nurture you over the years. So if you're looking at some detail in this and some words to go with this core self-esteem and confidence, not being scared, and resilience, adaptability, and that compassion we mentioned before, that's very important. Then we've got to close the gap. We've got to demonstrate this behavior. Then we get feedback, as we're getting feedback from you guys. Then we go and polish it, practice it, perform it again, and then we go and deliver. And hopefully the audiences get, they scrutinize a bit more. They might get bigger. There's more at stake, and that's fine. I quite like that side of things. There's a professor who talks about when we perform that many people are very nervous, and it's all about practice and preparation, all the things in front of us here. And then he says he takes it to another level, that some people then really enjoy performing. So maybe at one point they hate it, now they really love it. And I'll take it a step further, and I'm talking from experience here. Not only do I enjoy doing it, performing whatever aspect it is, I need to do it to feel normal. And that's the nth degree. And if you get to that level, you need to do something to do it, then nerves, I don't think they exist anymore. It's all about polishing that performance. And here we go. Let's see what we can get to next. So for some people, getting down to detail now and strategy, issues in so many different performers' repertoire, because we know chemically that the air in the lungs coming in equalizes the carbon dioxide. It calms down the chemicals we talked about last time of cortisol and adrenaline. It's all right being wired and you're ready for fight or flight and you're going to attack the beast. But if you get too much of that, you can go over the edge, and we call that stress out, a burnout, So breathing exercises in the moment, and sometimes, and this is what I do sometimes, do the breathing before I perform, it gets me ready to perform, in the zone to perform. So there's different box breathing exercises there. 3, 6, 5 could be, I call it any aeroplane. Call me any aeroplane, 747, breathing for 7, hold for 4, breathe out for 7. So anything where you're slowing down and controlling and holding breathing before you come to perform something will chemically give you a nice feeling that you're in control and reduce down maybe some of the chemicals that are stopping you, that perception of what's going to happen. And they're called cortisol and adrenaline. And I'm sure we're going to give you these presentation slides as well, but it's up to you to look at them, and it's up to you to practice them and see what works for you. In terms of how we see the world, there's a lot of sports psychologists who will say you can't stop a negative thought coming to your mind, okay? If you want to maximize performance, some of the best ways to do it is recognize some negativity. And it could be if I'm speaking in public, I could recognize the fact that it's a noisy room, the light's shining the wrong way and people can't see me, or the presentation's not right. And I can think, fine, if I start that's too much, that can take away my actual performance. So there's 2 techniques I use, a quick one and a slow one. I recognize a negative thought as if it's a knock on the door. I open the door, I've recognized it, I stay with that thought for a few seconds, then I'll say to that thought, not today, goodbye. So I'm letting it go out of my periphery, out of my consciousness. If that thought comes back to your door, a recurring worry, then you say, okay, come in the house, look around the house and stay with that negativity for say 30 seconds. Showing this thought that you're not scared. And what's happening internally is the chemicals don't know where to go, the bad chemicals. They've overproduced. So if you stay with that thought, there's this very strong link that they're going to start going down because they've got nowhere to go because you're not fretting out, you're not panicking. And when you let the thought out the back door, you'll feel more relaxed with things. So the psychological tips, not to ignore a bad thought, but just to play with it a little bit. Now, these are some great ones. And the middle one here, look around the room. This is such a simple one. I read this about 10 years ago. And what it is, when you go into a room anywhere, if you look around the room, looking at it, breathe in steady, slowly, surely, and you're saying to your internal mind, I am not scared of you. The chemicals want somewhere to go, and you're not fretting, you're not getting upset, you're on the nice edge of performance, not stressing out, not rusting out, right at the top of that ridge of stress, which is good, riding that wave. It's saying to the body, we're ready to perform, yeah? And a lot of people then, if you get the body language to be nice and straight, nothing in the pockets, nothing crossed, nice and relaxed. It's telling everything in your body, every sinew in your body, this is what you want. This is what you enjoy. We talked about some last time, the only beta, visualizing breathing practice. This is based on what's called NLP. Did we mention this last time, Jenny, the NLP, the fingers and stuff? You remember doing that last time?
We did fingers, and we did the butterfly breathing, and we breathing through the hand.
So you remember those two. Let's give you the reminder of the breathing once we breathe in. As we breathe out, squeeze the fingers together and visualize this event going well. So you do it before it happens, breathe in, squeeze, breathe out, and visualize it going well. It's pre-programmed in you. The more you do it, the better it is. The top right, accept, is what we talked about, accepting a negative thought in the previous slide. Some people need an extra buzz, because what happens, they get nervous before they start, then they drop back as if they say to themselves, oh, it doesn't really matter anyway, what's the point, I'm not that bothered. And you'll see it when people start yawning a lot before they perform, as if they haven't got enough cortisol and adrenaline, they've calmed themselves down that much that they're actually not, they don't want to perform anymore, they're a bit bored, and that's no good either. So think about some TV cameras watching you, that you're on TV and you've got to perform. That's always good for somebody. Younger self feed forward. There's a lot there, isn't there? Feed forward is using something from the past to help you in the present. So if I'm going to speak somewhere, I might think about a time in the past where it's gone really well, and what did I do really well? What was it? And a lot of the time, it's when I'm not thinking as much. I've done my preparation, I've parked that, and I'm looking at the audience, and I'm being in the moment, and I'm trying to speak to somebody, talk to them before I even start. And I use that from my previous experience. And obviously after the event, it's always good to get feedback. You don't have to take it all, but you'll get themes in feedback. And if you get strong themes, I'd advise to listen to that. But if you get little trickles here and there, then I'm quite happy for you to look at that positive side of that perception and go for a bit more positive stuff. If you follow the positive stuff more than negative stuff, there's not much in it. That's a great standard and equation to work to. Don't dwell on negatives. Another one quickly for you is reframing. And this is another way to get evidence. So what evidence was there that you were a failure or a success? That's the first thing, that something happens. What other reasons could there have been? You were rushed, or it was a bad place to do it in, or that was a bad week and some trauma happened. You're looking for any evidence around that performance. Would you see yourself as showing some resilience, coming through that, and reframing it and see yourself more of a success? Again, looking for more positives. Yeah, it's interesting. I said this yesterday. I was speaking at Independent School in Leicester. I said, you'll learn more from your perceived failures than your received successes. Okay, you learn and grow, but don't spend too long there. And growing from the past situations, and a growth mindset, we've touched on this about putting the effort, having the guidance and support, taking on challenges, putting things in context, and continually moving forward. When you're continually moving forward, and the top entrepreneurs do this, they keep driving on for the next level, they compartmentalize the past, and they're moving. They're very fluid. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. This is a quick one for it as a strategy, and as an overall view. When something potentially or actually negative happens, do you have you catch yourself, recognize maybe an aware before something happens? Certainly it can be afterwards as well. And do you have that logical prefrontal cortex that's not influenced by too much cortisol and adrenaline? It can actually think through a challenge. Okay, so my PowerPoint might be working. I could fret about it and really have a meltdown. I could say, you know what, I might sort it out soon, but for now I'm going to start off without the PowerPoint. So it's a green response, a logical thing. And people might like you for that variability and that flexibility of your approach, as opposed to a red react where the chemicals grab hold of that prefrontal cortex. You're doing things spontaneously without thinking, randomly, and there's a very high possibility that things aren't going to go well because we haven't thought through the outcomes. So do you green respond slowly, or do you red react to something where the situation is controlling you rather than you controlling the situation? And there's a little link for you to the amygdala hijack we talked about. And it's all about the strategies we've talked about before with breathing and visualization, but being in that moment, being that performer in that moment and having that versatility to change. And that's something that I've developed in the last few years. If something doesn't go quite right, I'm all right with that, really. And in many ways, I almost expect something not to go right, but I'm ready to alter it when it does. So that pre-readiness is always a good thing. Now, I believe Jenny gave you a grit test, 12 questions to do. Did this get emailed out to people, Jenny?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't been.
Okay.
We're doing that after, so.
That's okay. We're going to email you 12 questions, and this to give you a bit of context. It's out of 5. And if you get over 2.5, it means you've got a good base of resilience. And then what is resilience? This is not about push. It's about bounce back. It's adaptability. It's about compassion. It's about seeing things through. Yeah. Whether that's today, tomorrow, next week, next year. It's about seeing things through. And there's 12 questions, and you get a score for each one, divide by 12, and you get a final score out of 5. So 2.5 is a good base. Give it a context. As I say, above 4 is phenomenal. This is used in the American naval industry to weed out people who say they're really good, but when they come to do the physical test, they sort of fail. So they're given this written challenge to do first to get them ready to choose from the right ones. So anything above 4 is phenomenal. Last year, I got about 4.8. Now I'm a bit of a freak in a good way, and I'm older with lots of experience, but I've lots of failures. And sometimes, the amount of failures I've had has helped me become where I am now. And I've learned from that. I haven't sat down and started crying. I haven't sat down and think I'm not doing this anymore. I take it personally as a challenge. I think that's one of my strengths. And I'm academic to a level, but I'm not a supersonic professor. But I'm very rational about what I do and how I do it. So that might be something you can do to measure your grit. And it links in to self-esteem and confidence. It's an overall measure of that as well. So it's a really good instrument to use that you might want to do, for instance, then do it again at Christmas and see if you've improved on something like that. So let's come on to a real good power slide. Okay. When we're putting these together, the feedback was from yourselves and from Jenny that we need to sort of consolidate this into maximizing performance. And performance could mean anything. And we talked about this for the last half hour. It doesn't have to be on a stage. It could be any performance anywhere. So we talked in the last one about the 5 pillars of well-being: self-esteem and purpose, diet, sleep, exercise, and being connected. If those aren't in place, it's very difficult, going back to the previous slide today, going from that comfortable zone to stretch. It's very difficult to stretch out when those things aren't in place. So you must have some consistency in your lifestyle, that you recognize and have awareness that these things are important, then do things towards them and manipulate them in a positive way. That's your foundation. Because you might be able to get away with it here and there, but ultimately top performers are consistent. And, the top performers like Lady Gaga and the other ones there, the top performers, because they've got to keep being at the top all the time. Now, you could be a one-shot wonder, and that might be something you'll settle for that. Personally, why settle for one-shot wonder? You could be a lifetime wonder. You've got to get these things in place. Again, number 2, see each performance as an opportunity to learn and grow. I know some of my background's in professional football, and at Manchester City, for instance, they say we never lose, but we always learn. And I think it's an interesting phrase, that, isn't it? So use every performance as an opportunity to learn and grow. And it's something that's very important to you, because if you see it as all fantastic and brilliant, you could become arrogant. If you're too negative and that was rubbish and you throw the baby out with the bathwater and so everything's rubbish, then you're not being rational, logical. And you've got to be honest to think about it, to move yourself forward. This is where you might use friends and colleagues and peers to give you some feedback, to support you, to help you, develop you. Grow your qualities and achievements. Write them down, revisit them often. I don't mention this the last time, but I often say to people, and I know I've done this in the one-to-one coaching with some of you guys, use those sticky notes and write some of your good stuff on there. Invite your friends to write some good stuff about you. Put them in a jar, and when you feel a bit down, or when you want an extra boost, and you're nice and greedy for more good stuff, get into that jar, read some out to yourself. You know, nothing about appearance, nothing about your body, just about your performance, your abilities, your qualities. Yeah. It's a really good way just to remind yourself, yeah, that self-fulfilling prophecy that you're on the path. And this path could take different routes. It could go up and down. But if you keep on it, you're going to get there. And I have a phrase, it's not who gets there first that counts, just as long as you get there. Yeah. I'm 60. Most people my age are retiring. And I'm still in the game. I'm 40 sometimes because I've got that energy, enthusiasm, that want to learn and will play. But I've got that real curiosity. How good can I get? And if you have that approach to life, that will keep you going. Number 4, use feedback from trusted others. Don't listen to people you don't know, don't trust, never used before, because that could skew your development. And feed forward, to remind you again, is use stuff from the past to propel you into your present that will make you even better performers. So look at the evidence from the past and feed it forward into your next performance. Yeah, it's really powerful to do that. And the last one, we talked about some strategies to control your nerves, but you don't want to control them necessarily. You want to give them ability to take flight. So too much, and we stress out, we burn out. Too little, and we rust out. But it's our way of our body saying, it's showtime, show us your potential. But it's a good thing. And when we do that butterfly breathing, your stomach, that's where a lot of the time that emotion happens. Oh, I'm ready to go today. I like it, a little kick, little food back to me. Okay, there's some stuff that we're going to talk about as well. If you need to come back to us, and we've got some one-to-one coaching sessions. I was going to take that off for a second. That's some of my details. There was something to re-emphasize about the feedback, Jenny. Then we can even ask some questions now if there's any in the chat box, and you can monitor that for me.
Yeah, I will do. Thanks, Ross. So we've had one question in about the unconscious incompetence status, and whether that if one reaches the skill line unconscious competent, will he or she be back to being unconscious incompetent as time goes by?
Let me go back to that. Let me go back to that, see if we can find
That's that one. And
keep it that one, Jenny. Read that one to me again. There we are. Go on, say it again. Do you know the question?
When one reaches the skill line unconscious competent, will he or she be back to being unconscious incompetent as time goes by?
No, because if you constantly top up and keep getting feedback and keep practicing, you might not have to do as much, okay? But then it might become, because you don't do as much, you become even more authentic and more genuine, and you have a bit more spontaneity. And when I have a good session, personally, it's where I planned and performed it, and not thinking about it and doing it. But I've got the ability, because I'm not overanalyzing all the time, that I can be more spontaneous. And when I'm more spontaneous, based on facts and figures and information, but I'm happy to veer off, that's when people give me the best feedback. Because they don't like, they like that they've got information, but they like that it's going in different directions sometimes. So I don't know if that answers the question, but you don't have to do it as much. Just keep topping it up. Next question, Jenny.
Well, quite a few people actually have commented on imposter syndrome. That really resonated with a lot of people. And we just had some comments actually about it, around how people are finding it hard to believe others when they tell them that they're good at their job. No matter how many times somebody does that, that's quite hard, and to really believe that. And it might be worse working from home. Somebody else said that they've found that their imposter syndrome has got worse recently working at home.
Most people will actually ignore advice and feedback from trusted, loved, respected others, but they would take very quickly and very readily something from nobody they've ever met before and take it as the gospel truth. So what they're doing, they're minimizing the good stuff that's known sources, and they're magnifying and maximizing up stuff from an unknown source, uncorroborated, and taking it as the gospel truth. That is a flaw in thinking, and you've got to stop that thinking. There could be some evidence that person's truthful in some aspects, but you need to look at the whole context. You need to analyze it and think about it, and then corroborate it with your good side. So if you get something that's a bit negative to start with, from somebody you don't know, an unknown source, okay, play with it. Take it to your good people. What do you think about it? What do you think about that? Get some consensus. Take what you need from it, then dump it, and keep moving forward. You've got to keep moving forward. And I'll give you another analogy. And I like analogies because it puts things in simple terms. It's like driving a car. And if I'm looking through that windscreen, I'm not going to crash. But if I look back through the side mirrors occasionally and learn from the past, what I've gone past, it'll help me drive better in the future. If I spend all my time looking at the side mirrors and dwelling in the past, I'm going to crash. So you must keep taking information, but keep focusing on the road ahead all the time. Anything else, Jenny?
One other comment about how the performance techniques with the holding the fingers relates to study, and I think that it seems as though they want to be using that for study and exam performance, and absolutely yes. My point would be that helps in any situation, but you might want to comment more.
Yeah, I did that at a number of schools over the years, and I had a teacher saying to me, Ross, I don't want to put the fingers like that in an exam, it's going to put people off. And I said, understand, you could put your fingers in your pockets and still do an exercise. But there's another aspect to this that's important. A lot of these techniques are better when you practice them before performance occurs. So you do it as a routine the night before, an hour before, get yourself in that zone. It doesn't, sometimes performance, many times, it doesn't happen just like that. There's some obvious and subtle things that go on. And maybe this is a subtle performance measure that you do to prepare yourself. By the night before, the week before, you get yourself nice and relaxed, looking forward to this event. I'm actually not scared of it. I'm actually looking forward to it. I'm reducing down the cortisol and adrenaline. I'm using my prefrontal cortex to be rational and logical about it. I'm open to any feedback evidence and I'll interrogate it when I want to. But it's something I'm doing before. But on the event itself, you'll see them on the pitch doing aspects of this NLP, you know? So it's very important that you do it subtly on the day, but do it very opaquely and openly before.
And then just time for one last question before we talk about the feedback overall, and that is there a difference between humility and imposter syndrome? And if so, what is it?
Well, that's an interesting question. Being humility, humble, and I think sometimes if you can be too humble, it can, for some, not necessarily always younger people, but young people perhaps might experience this more, that by showing too much humility, you don't get the chance to develop that expression of confidence. I think the word I'd use better is vulnerability. And I find some of the best performers, and they can be older, but they don't have to be older, have vulnerability in them. So vulnerability is showing your weakness, yeah? And one of your weaknesses, I don't know the answer to that. And I think that's very good. It shows that nobody can be an expert in everything. And that's humility, that you're accepting that, a humbleness about it, that I am not known everything, but what I do know is this. And so I think I'd rather use vulnerability than humility. But I understand where the question's coming from. If you're too sort of laying back a bit more and saying, I'm not quite there yet and it's okay, carry on, you've got to be a bit brave. And that's an even better word, being brave. And Brené Brown talks about brave in the wilderness. Standing up for what you think, putting it out there, and then getting your feedback. Good question.
What I'm going to do now is just put...
Should I take it off screen for a second, Jenny? There you go.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is try and put in the chat a link to the feedback form. I hope that's appeared in everybody's chat message.
Yeah, I can see we'd like to run some further sessions. Yeah, I can see that.
Lovely. So we'd be really grateful if you could just take a few minutes now to answer those quick questions. It's always one of those things that's hard to do after the event. And you don't have to put your name in at all. It can be anonymous, but we just like your views so that we can build on your thoughts and create further sessions for you from September onwards. We were thinking of doing one a month. So we'd love your ideas on how this has been useful and what other topics you'd like us to cover. And in answer to a couple of questions, I'll ask our team to send out the previous sessions. Somebody's just asked me for ones they've missed. So yeah, that's fine. And we'll send the grit resilience test as well. Okay, so if we could just do that now, that'd be brilliant on the form.
And on the previous presentation, we've got a slide on measuring self-esteem. So you can have that. You've got your grit. and then you can look at some of the things on the 5 pillars as well from the previous presentation. So they all feed into where we are now.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just see if we've got some final comments.
Yeah, some comments about the quiz. I did promise some books. I'm sure Jenny's going to be forensically looking through them. Whoever hits nearest the mark, give me an address and I'll post the books out today. How's that for service?
I will email message the first person in a second. Let's go back to that. Okay, had a new message in. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
Please, yeah.
So I think I've really enjoyed these first 3 sessions, and I've taken away today, Ross, the umbrella image in my mind. I really like that idea. I like the performance circles and the green response instead of red react. So as always, I've benefited from your session, and I hope everybody else has too, and that we're helping everybody just to get in better mental shape for when lockdown ends. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. We're really pleased to have had you here, and I know time is valuable, so thank you for sharing your time with us and being part of these sessions. And we wish you all the very best for the rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you when we reconvene in September.